Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com Roundtable, brought to you by Techstrong. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. First, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope that you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. Over on the right side of your screen, you'll also find a chat tab where we want you to use that for more general comments. Let us know from where you're tuning in or maybe what role you play in your organization. And you'll also see that there is a handouts tab. Sneak has provided a top 10 open source vulnerabilities for 2022 report, so feel free to download that. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our topic today is securing open source software, and I'm joined by Jason Lane, Product Marketing Director at Sneak, Scott Gerlach, Co-founder and Chief Security Officer at Stackhawk, and leading our conversation today is our very own Mike Vazard, Chief Content Officer at Techstrong Group. Jason, Scott, thank you both for joining us. Mike, do you want to take it over from here?
Thanks, Cody. Guys, good to see you as always. I wanted to get started with some level setting, and maybe we'll call on Scott to get us down this path. But it seems like we went from open source software is the greatest thing since sliced bread to, oh my God, what's happening here? And we're having a crisis overnight. And maybe I was hoping you would walk us through, how did we land here? How did we get here? How suddenly has this become what I would argue, a major top of mind security issue heading into 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here. Open source software has really leveled up a lot of organizations and their ability to deliver features and functionality quickly to their customers, create value, right? So because somebody is passionate about a topic or a feature or a function, they can create a little library out of that. And those little libraries help other people who run into the same problems solve that problem quickly so they can get on to the main crux of their bigger problem. Super awesome. Really great visibility into what's going on in that code base. Lots of people reviewing the code, lots of open source, other actors coming in and looking at that code and going, hey, there's actually a security problem here. Here's a patch to help fix that. Was really, really good. And then what happened kind of next is, how do we distribute these packages more readily, more easily, get them into people's hands, enable them to build the projects with the right packages over and over and over again. And that's when we started building that kind of open source librarying system. So you can think of like NPM, PyPy, Composer for PHP, those kinds of things that are saying, we have a repository of packages and we're giving you tools and capability to manage which of those packages you want to pull into your project. And I think that's a lot of the area of concern today is, how are we putting effort into shoring up, making sure packages that end up on those repositories are valid, not malicious, they don't get typo squatted. And a lot of the problem there is, once again, developers built those things, right? Development teams, developers who care about this development ecosystem built these things. They maybe don't have a traditional security mindset, so they're not thinking of all the ways that a threat actor could attack that kind of platform with like typo squatting and email registration, like all kinds of stuff, right? There's tons of ways to attack these different platforms now. And we're trying to play catch up, right? But again, catch up is happening on open source repository. So PyPy is open source. NPM is actually opened by GitHub or owned by GitHub. So there's actually a lot of kind of movement happening in what's happening on NPM. But mostly volunteer workforces trying to come up with solutions to how to build more robustness into the security features of these kinds of things. And I think that's not the only place that you're seeing security problems, and Jason can chime in on this too, but that is one of the main places today, right? So threat actors are always going to attack the weakest point to get to their cheaply acquired assets. Today, that is one of the weaker points of this open source supply chain, is those package repositories, package delivery mechanisms. Jason,
yeah,
tell me I'm wrong on something there, because
everything you said is exactly right. Hey, everybody, I'm Jason. Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely right. Applications are actually more built and more assembled than built these days, right? So you basically 70 to 80% or so of code just comes out of, open source libraries like npm, because, like you said, it's easy to you don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? You want to move fast, move quick. I think one of the problems that we have in the open source community is lack of ownership by corporations around some of the open source packages, and I think we're starting to see some more of that involvement. Corporations can't look at they really shouldn't look at open source as just free code, right? Oh yeah, it's free, but at the same time it comes with risk, and you need to make sure that you're managing that risk, and you want to manage the packages that you're putting in there, making sure that it's meeting your company's policies around functionality, of course, but also who actually maintains it and that sort of thing. So
Jason, who is responsible for open source software security? Because we have maintainers on one side and the contributors to the actual projects. We've got the developers who are using the code and they're downloading it, and the maintainers and the contributors will be like, dude, I just gave you this free software, so why are you yelling at me for a patch for? Or you've got, security people on the other end of the spectrum who are, nominally responsible for application security, but, generally speaking, they think someone in the development team is doing that. So
yep.
Who's in charge of this here?
Well,
project?
that sort of defines you just defined open source, the open source community, right? Like, it's everybody. I think everybody's ultimately responsible for the code that they're putting into their applications, the security of that code. It's not the maintainer, right? The maintainer might be one person, that works part-time on a project. It may be an entire company or thousands of people who contribute to it. But at the end of the day, it's your application that's using that code. So you need to make sure that it's secure and meeting your security requirements, and contribute back. Obviously, if you can fix the issue and you can submit a pull request back to the library and add value to the community, by all means. Everybody should be part of this community. Everybody should be pushing fixes and improvements to that code, not just the two people who started the project. And that's one of the things, that's the value of things like Snyk or other SCA tools. We talked about how valuable and how fast you can move with open source, but it's not a decision, or it's not a discussion of should I use open source or should I not use open source. I think the answer is absolutely yes. We all have to move faster. You're not going to go recreate all this stuff from scratch yourself. It's just not going to happen. There's hundreds of thousands, or if not millions, of different packages out there that you could take advantage of and start building your applications really fast. So it's not a matter of that. It's a matter of making sure you're mitigating and managing your risk. So keeping an eye, scanning for new vulnerabilities. For example, the Snyk database is always being updated. We have a whole research team out there building and making sure that any new vulnerabilities that pop up in the ecosystem will get alerted based on what you're scanning against your project. So always making sure you're having active scans, monitoring of your libraries, of your code all the time, and just mitigating those issues along the way. So I think that's how you solve the issues.
I think to add to that a little bit, it's hard. It's very, very hard today to actively keep yourself up to date on how active is the development community or development on this project. How old is it? How many bug fixes? How responsive are they to, hey, I found a problem, and how quickly does that get turned into a fix? It's super hard, especially if the security team thinks they own it and they're not interacting with the AppSec team or the app team, right? The development team. So if there's an AppSec team and they're not sitting with their development partners and figuring out how they're using software, how they can help them go faster with tooling and information to help them make better decisions, it is super hard as a developer to be able to consume that and do your day job. Mm-hmm. So I always think, the more the more highly informative, powerful tools that you can empower your development team with to make good decisions, the better it is. Whether those are open source or paid tools, the better it goes for everyone, because people are now making active decisions about something as opposed to passive decisions. And passive decisions is something I talk about all the time, where people don't have the capability, time, or knowledge to make a decision, so they just don't. Mm-hmm. That's a passive decision. If you give them the right tooling, information at the right time to make an active decision, even if they make the wrong decision, that's a much better spot than making passive decisions. So, if I'm an AppSec person and I talk about this with all of my security teams, go sit with your development teams and figure out how they're building, what things are pressuring them, and how you can more tightly integrate. Giving them information to make better decisions is always a good thing. And I know there's tons of stuff out there. I think Jason at Sneak Team even has kind of a repository or a package reputation tool out there that's free to use to be able to look at that kind of stuff. And I know there's other people that have that as well, but that's really good information to just be able to go, hey, I'm thinking about using this package for a major piece of what I'm building. All I got to do is spend 5 minutes looking at the reputation of that package. That's a much, much better spot than I have no idea what my development team is doing, and I'm going to try to catch them in 6 months when I figure it out myself.
Yeah, I think the earlier in the process, you kind of said it right. Like, sit with your dev teams, but also the developers should be thinking a little bit ahead as well too. Like, what packages I want to have this functionality? What packages are actually safe? There's probably 5 or 10 things that solve the same problem. Do you pick one that's well maintained, or do you pick one that just popped up in the store, yesterday, or in the marketplace yesterday, that has no maintenance history, right? So yeah, that's Sneak Advisor is what you're thinking of, I think.
Yeah.
Is this a problem, Jason, that's coming home to roost, that's been around for a while? Because it felt like, to me, the security folks tended to focus on security operations and applied their budget to the things that they owned and controlled. And application security may not be one of those things. They think that somehow or other somebody on the software team is doing that. Conversely, the software team thinks that somebody in the cybersecurity team is taking care of all of that. So has this been an issue that, surprisingly hasn't come up sooner, but maybe it's just finally coming home to roost?
I think it has to do with, how prominent. So as we all know, I hate to use the word because it's so cliche at this point, but digital transformation has been happening for the last 5-10 years or so. Companies have been building modern applications where they're using the cloud, they're using APIs, they're really building the applications, and everybody's moving so much faster. And when you move so much faster, well, you're gonna naturally want to go back and start using open source software. You're not gonna want to rebuild this stuff. So I think it's been speeding up because every organization is speeding up. Everybody is building software so much faster, and so they're just relying. And I think if you go back 10 years ago, a lot of major organizations, big corporations, were against using open source software. They didn't want to use it because they were afraid of the license risk. They're afraid of security risk. They're afraid of, a lot of things. And so I think there's a lot more people in the world who've come around and accepted that as just, it's okay. This is normal now. And so I don't know, Scott, are you guys seeing that as well? Like, as far as like open source evolution?
It's one of these things where we were talking about DevSecOps before we started this, where security is trying to be integrated into this DevOps movement, DevOps process, and maybe doing it in a weird way, which is like, I'm going to jam ourselves right in the middle of DevSecOps. But it's one of those things where for a long, long time, we had really hard perimeter shells, and we had really, we did a lot of defensive mechanism around the edge of our network and the edge of our application. And we maybe didn't expose so many services to the outside world. Well, digital transformation, cloud services, all of this stuff is making it easier, and it's supposed to be, right? It's making it easier for developers to put engineering teams to put features into the world so that they can create value for customers. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point. get server resources up and running faster so that we can get things on the net so that people can use them so that we can generate revenue faster. That's the whole point. And it's good. I think what happened was the security team got left behind a little bit in that because they felt really comfortable in their candy coated shell, trying to protect resources in the enterprise, and got left behind a little bit on how do I work with these teams to do, to make sure that our application security, our infrastructure security, all of these things that is now going really fast. We got left behind a little bit. And we're trying to play a little catch up now. We're trying to play as a security team. We're trying to play a little catch up. How can I do this better? And the answer is you can't. This is one of the areas of information security you can't do in a corner. There's a lot of stuff you can do in a corner as an InfoSec team, whether that's log monitoring or incident response or whatever that is. This one just flat, you can't do it in a corner. You have to build good partnerships and relationships with engineering teams and understand what they're building, why they're building it, and how you can help them go faster, because that is their job. Their job is to go faster. Mm-hmm. Your job is to help them go safer.
And there's probably 500 for every one of the security team, right?
Yeah. I mean,
no way you're going to be able to sit with 500 people.
The ratio, the generally accepted ratio that we've been talking about this year is 100 to 1. Yeah. I think that's actually a little skewed because of large enterprises. I think it's more in the 200 to 500 to 1 security person to engineering team. And I guarantee you, if you go, well, I can't talk to anybody because there's too many of them, you're not going to succeed. And two, if you go, I haven't talked to anybody, so here's the big bang deployment of blah, that will also not work.
Yep.
So working with a team, finding a team, figuring out how they work, get them into good shape, build them as champions in the engineering org for security. Hey, we just worked with the security team. They helped us go faster, safer. You should do that. Get more volunteers going on there. That's kind of the security champions kind of model a little bit, but you have to work with them so that you understand what they're doing and they understand the risks that you're trying to help them solve. So I think that's kind of the coming home to roost part of this, right? Is we got really comfortable with our hard exterior. We provide servers and we manage the servers, and the world changed out from under us. So we got to do DevSecOps now. So I think this is the catch-up part of DevSecOps, security teams understanding how that's working. And there's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jason, to that point, so there is this debate about shifting left, right? And it goes to this kind of continuum, right? One set argues we got to give the developers tools and we'll shift everything very far left. But then, a lot of people will look at that and say, well, that's nice that you gave them tools, but for the most part, none of those developers know what they're looking at, to Scott's point, because security was an elective that none of them took. And so you could give them all the tools in the world, and it's not clear that they would know what to do with that. So do we need to embed more guardrails into the DevOps workflow and into the build process and catch the issues there? Because that's where we're going to automate the response. Or, is it some sort of continuum of all of the above, and we need to just figure out where all the points of injection are, and we're going to have to hire security engineers the way we hire SREs?
So I would say that it's a little bit of everything, but I think the initial mantra was, let's shift left, meaning let's give the responsibility of security, or at least a big part of the responsibility, to the development team. But as you said, that's not their forte, right? The developers don't really understand all there is to know about some of these security vulnerabilities and why they do what they do and why they're risky. And so giving them the tools in their IDE, giving them things like PR checks when they do a pull request, and having it actually compare all the code as they're pushing changes. They can find things in progress in the software development process. That's going to be much better for the developer's mindset, because if you give them a ticket and they have to come back 2 weeks later after this has left their mind, they have to re-ramp up with, okay, what was I building? How does that fit into what I need to do? Is that going to break functionality? All of that stuff. That is the absolute worst thing you could do. I mean, sometimes it's inevitable, you have to do it, but if you can avoid it, that's better, right? The more you can avoid, the better. So if you can get them the fixes, you can get them the identification up front in the development process as they're pushing code around, and then do another scan at the end, and maybe you throw them back some tickets or whatever, that's fine. But that's, if you send them back 100 tickets versus, 2 tickets versus 100, I think you're better off getting an overall successful deployment rather than trying to shove a whole bunch of stuff back in their backlog that they need to fix, and then the next sprint's delayed and all that. So I guess to answer your question, I think it's a little bit of everything. We do have to educate developers, right? So giving them elaborate remediation advice in the fix itself, right then there at their fingertips, that they can go, oh, this is a remote code execution. This is the risk. Here's some sample code, how you fix it. Here's, for open source, here's the version that you need to download. You need to have at least this version. And oh, by the way, here's some break fix advice from the community that says, we think that this version might break this, this, and this, and here's all your dependencies. So you have to have a view of everything and really kind of understand when you upgrade something, how that's going to impact other things in your environment.
All right. We have a question from somebody in the audience that kind of pertains to this whole thing. I'll throw it to Scott first, but basically it says, the open source community is a fast moving train. So how do you kind of educate them, build the processes, and make all this thing happen without either A, slowing down the train, or B, taking it off the rails entirely, Scott?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there's a presentation, a webinar I've done about Go Faster, Safer. And I like to think of the security team, specifically the application security team, as it applies to like racing. So a lot of race fans out here in InfoSec community. And you see, if you look at a racetrack and you look at all the things that are going on the racetrack, that thing is dominated by security features, right? The track is dominated by security features. The car is dominated by security features. The stands, the helmets, everything. It's all security features.
Safety first.
The whole point of the race is to go fast. So they're not exclusive, right? Safety and fast are not exclusive. What's really hard to do is to get people the information that they need while they're building race cars, while they're building racetracks, so that when you put the product on the track, it can go fast. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the really hard part, is to kind of work with these engineering teams to set up rules on how we're gonna working agreements, how we're gonna do testing. We're already doing software testing as engineering teams, whether it's unit tests or integration tests or functional tests, all of this testing. We need to think of security testing like that. We need to think of it in the same way that other kind of testing happens, because it's the same. It doesn't mean your developers are going to run it every single time they're about to make a PR, but I guarantee you that the CI/CD system is. And if the CI/CD system says, hey, your unit test didn't pass, they're going to want to be able to bring that back to their IDE, work on the code, validate that is working now, because by running that unit test locally, and then go, cool, when I commit this next time, it's going to pass that unit test because I've tested it here. When it runs in CI/CD again, it's going to pass there. I'm going to be in good shape. We are totally not doing this very well in application security, infrastructure security deployments, because we're continually not thinking about who are the people that are consuming this information that can fix these problems. We set up a lot of tooling and a lot of information to alert the security team, so the security team can go tell the engineering team, like, undo the middleman in this problem, right? Undo the middleman and be a consultant to these engineering teams, like the race safety team is, right? Hey, we're thinking about, building the car in a different way with this kind of a downforce thing, in a rear wing, so it has less downforce, more downforce. And they're like, well, that's not really in the rules, but maybe we can make a rule change across the entirety of the racing consortium so that everyone plays by the same rules. So thinking about, like, who do I need to get this information to, and where and when, so that they're incentivized to take action in working agreements with the engineering team, kind of setting them up, helping them be successful, is probably the most important thing you can do as an application security person today. by helping them go faster, safer, you actually will just more likely trigger the engineers or curious people. If you can grab their curiosity with like at the right time and go, hey, there's a problem with this, they're like 99.4. I want to say 0.4. The chance of them wanting to fix that thing because they take enormous pride in what they're building is really, really good. So getting them that information at the right time, in the right context, the right kind of information about what this problem is, super, super important to being very effective in application security.
As a car guy,
Jason,
I absolutely love. Sorry, I love that analogy, brother. I've never heard this in the 2 or 3 years I've been working in security. Like, that's an awesome analogy. I love that. Safety teams, NASCAR. I'm using it.
Got a whole deck for you, Jason.
Well, let's keep with that, because there was a guy who wrote a book once. It was called Unsafe at Any Speed.
Sure.
And, he was talking about cars, and, and then we had, a huge effort to make cars in general more safe. So do we, as all these vertical industries that rely on software, do we need some sort of massive moonshot type program where we're going to collectively go in and make software more secure without compromising the rate at which we can build? But, is this a bigger issue than just one, a handful of security people trying to do the right thing? Jason, do we need a massive movement?
Well, I think the governments are actually stepping in and doing that for us as I don't know, maybe it's controversial, as they should, but I think whenever something affects the masses, that's where governments can kind of step in and help make sure that we're following certain rules and guidelines to keep everybody safe. But I think for the most part right now, the government, as we go back to the beginning of 2021, when the Biden administration gave their SBOM, EO, right, their executive order, that was mainly to protect them, right, for the most part. But they're like, hey, I want to make sure that every software that the government buys is, secure, and so it requires this now. And so rules are made because things happen that cause problems, right? It's like, I don't know, it's a stupid example, but like, I saw a sign in a bathroom one time that said no throwing cans in the toilet. Like, why do we have to have a sign? Why is that a sign? Why is there even a need for that sign? Well, it's because somebody did it, obviously. So it's like, these rules and some of these government initiatives are there because it's happening. People are, the software is vulnerable, so people are taking advantage. They're go back to SolarWinds or some of these big exploit issues. It's happening in the wild. So the government and other people have to protect themselves. So, I mean, in terms of like a big moonshot, there's only so much any one organization can do when it comes to applying rules across the road for all organizations. I think that's where the governments can be helpful, but also things like OpenSSF, the Linux Foundation, is also another key organization that's helping to shape the rules as well. And that's important to be part of that and just be in tune with what's happening there, because they're actually helping to establish, like certain formats, standards around SBOMs. Do we go Cyclone DX? Do we go SPDX? Do we go other things? How does X play? And so there's a lot of sort of standardization that's going to happen over the next few years that we're going to be part of, and that everybody needs to be just aware of. And I think that's the moonshot that's happening organically, because, it's being pulled by corporations, it's being pulled by the government, it's being influenced by millions of organizations around the world trying to like vie and push things around. So I don't know there's a single fix. I think it's just a little bit iterative.
All right, well, let's talk about the government for a minute, but before I get into that, Scott, somebody wants you to put a link to your slide deck up there for the racing analogy. So if you want to throw that in the chat window.
Let me see if I can find a link to the entire webinar. How's that?
There you go. But let's go on the other end of this extreme, Scott. So there was once a president of the United States who said the 9 most dangerous words in the English language were, "Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So how do we kind of make that meaningful? Because, we see the executive order came out and basically it applies to federal agencies, and there's many, many pages of it, and you kind of scratch your head and you look at it and you go, well, okay, we should have SBOMs, which is a software bill of materials, which is a list of ingredients in the software. But to anybody in the security space, they're like, well, thank you for the list, but what am I supposed to do with that? So, what exactly is the role of government, and where does SBOMs fit in, and what can we expect to be reasonably followed versus kind of, a document that has some quote unquote suggestions?
Sure. I missed getting to chime in on your Ralph Nader thing. So I'm going to try to weave that in here a little bit.
All right, go for it.
Ralph Nader, for people that don't know, is the one that said unsafe at any speed. He was talking about Ford Pintos, I think, and the need for regulation in car industry because the car industry wasn't doing a good job. And so the government stepped in and added regulations to the car industry. If the software industry has the same problem historically over and over and over again, where we're putting the public in danger and the government needs to step in, they will, right? We're starting to see little forays of executive orders and best practices and those kinds of things that applies to the government today. If we don't do a good job of continually building and making this better, they will step in, and that is super scary. My really good friend, Christine Jones, former general counsel at GoDaddy, tweets every so often about some technology legislation that's coming out, and her tagline is always, yet another reason we need more technologists in Washington, D.C. Because if we don't do a good job as an industry regulating and fixing and making things better for consumers, then people that are lawmakers in D.C. will step in and do it. And they're not very technically savvy most of the time. There's a few out there that are pretty technically savvy, but a lot of them are not. And it will make things very, very difficult. So we don't want that necessarily. Hopefully they can provide guidance and information to help people do best practices. Companies like GitHub, who own NPM and is part of this critical piece of this infrastructure, Microsoft, are investing more and more into these systems so that they are more secure. There's more things happening there. I think just as an industry, participating more in this stuff, right? Participating more in, there's an open source project I care about as an application security person or a security person or a developer. I have zero coding ability, but I can write documentation. I can help that community grow and be better, especially if it's something that my company, my product, my something really relies on. Adding a little extra, it doesn't have to be a lot. Adding a little extra effort goes a long way. And then all of the SBOM discussion that's happening is funny to me. I was talking to Jason about this before we started the webinar. SBOM is a weird thing to me because it doesn't have an action. It's like making a soup and then sending people the recipe card. Like, here, I made the soup. Here's the recipe card. Oh, where's the soup? Well, this is the recipe card. And then you're like, okay, cool. Well, where did the flour come from? I don't know. It's on the recipe card. It says 1 cup of flour. So SBOM is weird to me because I think the actual actionable thing that SBOM is software composition analysis will actually tell you what parts of the recipe are wrong. And you should update and change and all that good stuff. So those are the kinds of things that if we don't do a good job as an industry, a security industry, software industry, fixing, the government will step in. I think we're doing a pretty good job as we discover more and more of these attack types, more and more of these problems in the supply chain infrastructure. Like SolarWinds happened, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Think of all the changes that have happened since then. Just so happens that a nation state got a little over aggressive with what they were trying to do to the government. So the government had a big response.
All right. So before we get any further, in fairness to the already much maligned reputation of the Ford Pinto, apparently one of our attendees is pointing out that the actual issue is the Corvair, or the Corvair?
Corvair.
Yeah. Corvair.
Corvair. So for those of you,
my bad.
But I guess it's worth going back and revisiting that book. Maybe somebody should update that for the software industry and see where we go. Jason, we are talking about SBOMs, and this is great and wonderful thing, but how ultimately, to Scott's point, how do we operationalize this stuff in a way that it's meaningful to cybersecurity people? I mean, are we eventually going to get to some sort of red light, green light system based on what's in the SBOM and whether code will be deployed? Or is it just kind of like, the list of ingredients on the food at the store, but I have no idea where to Scott's point, where those soybeans came from in the first place?
So it's funny. After the executive order, everybody starts coming out of the woodwork asking for, hey, do you do SBOMs? Can we do SBOM? Sneak was actually built as a supply chain, software bill of materials company. Like that's what SCA tools do, right? They look at your dependencies and they show you what's in your software. Now an SBOM means something a little bit different than that. An SBOM is now just the formatted JSON file that you get with all of that information, right? And so people are saying, oh, can you export it? So as far as how do we operationalize it, I think the first thing is there today, which is, okay, let's make sure we can see all of the stuff in my code. And to your point, Scott, it's like, I made the soup and now here's the recipe. That's important so that you have a log, right? And so, but then what do we do with that? Well, we file it away and we keep track of it. And maybe that's for the next hour until something changes. Maybe it's for the next week or month or day or whatever. But then as things change, you can always have a record of, okay, what went in the soup? Because you make it first and you're like, as a developer, it's very creative, it's inventive. You're like, okay, let's add this functionality. Let's use this package here. Maybe that one. No, let's change that one. Let's pull this one in. And so you don't necessarily have that planned all the way 100% up front. And as things change, you always want to have that record. So it's sort of source of truth, if you will, for the code. And that's step number one. I think you need to have that SBOM in order to basically keep track of the progression of where things are. And then the most important thing about the SBOM is not just seeing it, but then being able to compare that to a vulnerability database and see, okay, now I know I have these 15 packages in my software. Which ones of them are vulnerable? Which ones are not? And then being able to see that information, and you enrich that SBOM with that extra vulnerability data, or those. There's a whole other file format called VEX, and that's basically the vulnerability exchange. And I was going to say at the beginning of this that we're still trying to figure this out as a company, as an industry. Like, we have some visions, we have some plans. We're seeing what customers are asking for, how customers are using these things, but nobody quite has the full answer yet. And this is this beginning of a new thing that is going to have to be sort of figured out along the way. And then there's a lot of people asking for, like, oh, can I get it in the can I get a button in the application? Well, okay, what are you gonna do with it? We're asking our customers, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with it? And so we're still trying to figure that out as well. But those are that's going to come to light as we move forward. And I think operationally, some big challenges that we have to fix or solve are things like, what actually constitutes an SBOM? Is it just the microservice, or is it the entirety of the application? Does over-the-shelf software get included in that or not? What about that package that we probably aren't supposed to be using that maybe is in our software, and we don't necessarily want to tell people about that? So SBOMs is more of a transparency issue than an actual technology issue or a vulnerability issue. It's like, hey, I'm being transparent here. I'm showing you what I have in my software. So then NDAs have to be wrapped around it as well, because who knows? Maybe you don't want to give away that information. That could be proprietary information to your organization. So yeah, there's a lot of concerns that we have to solve for and figure out how to operationalize that. Do we store them? Like, how does Sneak, like, we're looking at how do we distribute our own SBOMs, and we have an internal debate. Do we have 6 SBOMs or do we have 1,000 SBOMs? We don't even know like what the distribution is, because it depends on how you sort of scope it. Like, is it a microservice or is it a whole suite of applications? And then these are things that every organization is sort of grappling with right now. And we hope to have more information over the next couple months, 2-3 months, about how we approach this problem, and we'll share some of that as well. But yeah, I think it's a good topic of discussion, and it's something that everyone's trying to figure out.
All right. on a more hopeful note, how automated can all this get as we go along? Because one of our attendees is asking the question that says, one of the issues is there's so many CVEs coming out that it's hard to keep track of what goes where. And I think everybody is familiar with the notion of, okay, well, we had this log4j issue, and then we spent, months just trying to figure out where all the instances of log4j were. And so we're spending months to fix something that probably only took a couple of minutes to fix once it was found. But will we get to the point where, the SBOM is telling you that there's a new CVE and here's where all the instances of it matter to you, and then maybe we can at least reduce the pain of fixing the issue? Scott, is that where we're headed?
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally automatable. Like this is totally a thing that you can do today with SCA for the log4j instance, or some other tooling, DAST tooling or SAS tooling for code that you write, which you should also be worried about, not just open source code. But this is all automatable, right? And this is all automatable in CI/CD. It's available for developers to use for testing, so that you can get to a spot where you're like, okay, cool. We're in good shape. We're in good shape. We've tested this software. We've accepted the risk on the things that we want to accept on. We've fixed the things we don't want to fix. Now we're going to test iteratively. Every time someone makes a PR, we'll test it again. Every time somebody makes, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, CI/CD systems can run in a scheduled mode as well as on PRs and on. So you can actually, if something isn't even in development, there's not active PRs going on, you could still run these tests on these CI/CD pipelines to check for outdated CVEs or outdated packages that now have CVEs, all this kind of stuff, and inform the right people about it to go, hey, there's a problem with this package. We should update it. And there's a PR, like in the case of SCA, you could make automatic PRs that say bump the version of the log4j package. Hopefully that PR also includes all the unit tests and the integration tests that go along with it. Doesn't only fix the log4j version, it also runs the tests for the application. So as you're thinking about how software is developed and integrating in automation of application security supply chain issues, thinking about how to integrate that with the other tests that are happening with this software that you're concerned about is super important, because this is very automatable, and it is how we solve the 100-to-1 problem with application and engineering. Automation.
All right. That's and hope that, cross your fingers and toes and nothing breaks once you do all that. But, at least we have testing and we'll see how it works out. Jason, is this going to get a little nastier in this regard, right? We're talking today about the simple fact that there's vulnerabilities in code that are done, pretty much by accident. But it seems like the bad guys are getting a little more malicious in their intent, and they're trying to deliberately insert malware into open source projects. And so will this become a little more challenging because the bad guys are figuring out, hey, this is the most efficient way to put all kinds of instances of malware downstream is to compromise an open source package itself. So is this going to get a little more difficult and challenging than it already is?
Well, so we saw that when the Ukraine-Russia war started, right? There was some vulnerabilities that popped up in a malicious package that essentially the maintainer decided he was going to support the Ukrainians and basically attack Russians if they had an IP address in Russia. And so he maliciously changed a package that was being used by a lot of people to do that. And so I think, yes, that is a problem. That is something that is going to occur. We call that protest war, or sorry, protestware. But there's other sorts of malicious activity going on within packages that will find their ways into these packages, right? And so that's why it's so important to keep your eyes peeled when it comes to what packages you have in your software. Having a team like Sneak or other SEA tools for that matter, who have a research team that is out there actively hunting. We have, tons of people on our team who are out there every day looking in the dark web, looking for, little hints of, issues in one package or another, going and running tests on their own and running prototypes and proof of concepts to prove it out, see how attackable, how exploitable it really is, and then get that into our database so that all of our customers can benefit from that research and that data and that testing, right? And so although that is increasing and we're seeing more of that, if you have a partner out there on your, protecting you and looking out for your code, then you don't really have a whole lot to worry about, because we're on it. Like, as soon as things come up, we have alerts going out to our customers as soon as we know about things, and usually that happens within a day or two or the same day in a lot of cases. So
Scott, is it your sense as well that this is going to devolve into something that feels like spy versus spy? But I, as an organization, I'm never going to have the resources to put together the counterintelligence team. So I'm going to have to rely on some third party to do that for me. And is there a conversation to be had about what exactly should security teams be doing themselves versus relying on others to do for them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going to have to outsource some of this because you can't do everything all at once. I was just working on something earlier today where somebody was asking me, what kind of things do threat actors go after? And they're after assets, and they're after money, information, or fame. And then maybe that last group, the activist group, is after just being able to get their message out there, which is what happened in that Ukraine war thing. So as a security person, if you're thinking about all the assets that you control for your customers, on behalf of your customers, and you think about where those assets can be accessed, especially in applications, really focusing in on the key points of kind of the application flow to be able to say, this API really controls most of the customer data for our company, or these sets of APIs. So I'm going to really focus here. I'm going to really understand what these engineering teams are doing, what problems they're trying to solve, what kind of things that they're building, and what kind of challenges they're having, and how can I help them, so that you can get to the point where you're really taking care of your assets that you are in control of for your customer. That's probably the most important thing, because the chance that some random company that's watching this webinar is going to get hit by activism attack, probably pretty low. But they guarantee you they're controlling some kind of data for their customers that someone would probably find valuable. It's either money or something you can turn into money, or fame that you can turn into money. It's about money. So understanding that that's what people are trying to do is take the cheapest way to get the most money. It's weird how attackers work like everyone else. The cheapest way to get the most money possible is usually what people are going to do when they're being a threat actor, unless they're a nation state actor. That's a whole different thing. That's what they're going to do. And so if you think about the same thing around data that your company controls, what's the cheapest way to get the most information that I could turn into money? That's probably the same path a threat actor would take.
All right. See, there's another book about follow the money in this whole thing somewhere.
Follow the money.
All right. Jason, I would say it's fair to say that there's not a lot of love lost over the years between security folks and developers. Security folks might view developers as the root cause of all their troubles, and developers view security people as to be avoided at all costs. And let's figure out how to end run this as much as possible. Do we need to change the attitudes on both sides? Do we lock everybody up in a room till they come to their senses, or is there some other way to go after this thing?
I think it's a bit of a misnomer, honestly. Like when I got into this security industry, I was told the same thing. Like, security doesn't like engineers, engineers don't like security. And I would say that may be the case in some organizations, but far and away, I think they work very well together. And I think there still is this sort of push and pull, right? Like, security team want to make sure everything's security, focused, and make sure everything's fixed. And I think if they do it in a tactful way, they put in the automation, they put in the right tooling that meets their needs, then there's no conflict. It's the conflict arises when I think, they're not working in sync together, and the developers are out, pulling down whatever package they can find anywhere in the dark web, pulling it into their application, and then just going and pushing it to production. And then the security team comes back 3 weeks later and says, here's 400 things you need to fix by tomorrow. Then all of a sudden they're at odds, right? So if you can, I think at the beginning of this, this webinar, Scott talked about making sure the security team and the dev teams go and they sit down together and they talk about the workflow. They talk about each other's requirements. How do I secure this? Well, I don't know how to do security. Teach me. Okay, let me help you. Let's find some people within the development organizations who can be developer security champions, who are very interested in security and want to actually help influence the process and streamline things. Build in automation. Make sure you have the right partner, the right tooling, secure every step of the way. Then all of a sudden the world is great again. It's like, hey, developers can write code, solve security issues. The security team's not sending back a boatload of stuff at the end of development. And at the end of the day, the organization is protected as a single entity. After all, they all work for the same company. They should be fighting the same fight, not fighting each other. And so I think there's a lot of companies out there that are doing this, and it just kind of depends on some of the personalities that are involved, and maybe there's some personal conflicts here and there. But like as a general rule, I think it's they all want the same thing.
Scott, do we need just a little more adult supervision, or you see a lot of people talking about the need to make developers sign their code and they want to track who wrote what, when, and where, and there's a hard push for accountability? Are those things mutually exclusive, or can we, find a way where people are being held accountable, but not to the point where they feel oppressed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what we're talking about here is incentives. There's already ways to understand who wrote what, when, and where. That's what version control systems are all about. Excuse me. But what we're talking about here is incentives, right? Engineering teams are incentivized by how much stuff they get out the door, how many features they get out the door, if you want to incentivize them to do something else, sign their code, spend 5 minutes looking at package.json and the main packages that go into it. You have to incentivize them to do it. It's like saying, hey, somebody's walking down the street and we want them to pick up all the trash when they're walking down the street, because it's a nice neighborly thing to do, right? It's a nice neighborly thing to do, to just pick up trash, except for they're not incentivized to do it. So some people might do it, and most people are not going to do it. Now, on the other hand, if you go, hey, if you pick up some trash and record that you picked up some trash, we're going to give you Bucky Beaver points. And those Bucky Beaver points can be exchanged for, I don't know, you take your HOA away for a month, whatever. Now you've got an incentive. So if you're trying to change someone's behavior, you got to work on why they're incentive to change that behavior. Some people will just do it because, yeah, it's the right thing to do. Not many. Some people, if you make it easy for them to do it, they'll want to do it because it's the right thing to do. So the easier you make something to do, the more likely somebody is to do a thing. But if you really, really want to change something like, hey, sign this code, or hey, blah, 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 there has to be an incentive to do it. Today, the incentive is I get paid and my performance is evaluated on how many features I get out the door and how well that code performs. Okay, work with the engineering leaders to incentivize, as part of that, some part of security. Got to incentivize people if you want them to take different action.
Some people say, Jason, that getting people to sign code is just too hard. Is it hard? Can we make that easier? Is there a way to think about managing that process that's a little simpler so that, more people can behave like the proverbial Japanese soccer team that cleaned up its own locker, right?
I don't know how hard it is, honestly. I'm not a developer, so I can't speak to that. But I don't know. I think when I think of signing code, though, I think of the old school days of going to somebody like Microsoft and saying, I want to buy this software, and I have to pay a license, and then I have to then I'm reliant on them, right? I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about when you talk about signing code, or if you talk about like source code management and pull requests and things like that, all of that is tracked and signed and that sort of thing. But in terms of like licensing it and who owns it and the maintainers and that, I think, we've gone from like buying over-the-shelf software to completely open source, and so now are you saying that we need to like try to secure that with some sort of like ownership token or key? Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, totally hypothetical. Maybe there's a blockchain solution. I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe there's something that can be transparent and secure at the same time. I think you kind of have to figure out what the right path is. I don't know what the answer is to that.
It's incentives. It's incentives, guys. Like there's a place where code signing is mandatory. It's the Apple Store. The incentive is if you don't do it, your code doesn't end up in the Apple Store. It's incentive. So if you want people to sign code, there has to be an incentive to do it, especially if you want like an open source developer to sign their code somehow. There has to be an incentive. Otherwise, it's just extra work.
Right. The incentive might be a stick or a carrot, but one way or another, it's an incentive.
That's right.
All right, gentlemen, we have 5 minutes left. So, Jason, let's start with you. What's your best advice to folks? What do you wish they were doing more of? What makes you scratch your head and just go, man, I can't believe we're still talking about this?
So I would say one of the biggest blockers to getting people to use the tools that you have bought as a security team is making sure the tools are developer centric, right? Making sure those tools work within the developer ecosystem. That is by far, like, it doesn't matter how long a company has been around, how many bells and whistles that tool has. If it does not work in the developer's, workflow, and I don't mean developer friendly, because there's a lot of companies out there that claim to be developer friendly, and the devil's in the details, right? Like, you can be developer friendly and have an IDE integration, but it might take you 15 steps to get the API key in order to actually authenticate that. That's not friendly. That's hard to use. So I think really looking at those details and saying, how does this tool integrate into my developer workflows? And are developers actually adopting the use of it? That's number one. And I think just putting in that automation to help simplify the process is number two. And it sort of fits hand in hand, right? Like, developer first essentially means, take as much of the overhead away from me so I can focus on my job. I can focus on creating value, and the security happens underneath the hood, and it comes up when it needs to come up, but only at the right time. And yeah, I think those are the main things. I mean, all the other stuff is like, details, but that's, in my opinion, that's like number one. That's one of the reasons I came to Snyk to be here, because I thought that was the path that they were on, and it certainly was. And that's why I'm here. So.
All right, Scott, 2 minutes, best advice.
2 minutes, best advice. Reframe your role in the company. Reframe your role in the company as a consultant about risk, and not a person that needs to find things to be valuable. Your job should not be finding things and therefore I'm valuable. Your job should be, I can help you understand what this other thing is finding because we've automated it. Like, rethink your role as a security professional, application security person, as a consultant to the people in the different parts of the organization. Help them understand we don't have to fix all the risks, but here's the ones that we should fix.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks for the insights. I would just share that my father once gave me a piece of advice. He said, friends don't make work for friends. Otherwise, they're not your friends. And just keep that in mind. Cody, take us home.
Sure thing. Thank you, Mike. And Scott, Jason, thank you both for joining us today as well. I'd like to remind our audience that today's session was recorded. Following this program, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find it living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars. So I do still have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give out. Now, our winners are Brandy P, Neboja V, Craig R, and Ayush B. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card, but if you don't happen to see it, please do check your spam folder. So we really do appreciate everyone spending the last 60 minutes with us. We really appreciate your time, but we also really appreciate your feedback. So as soon as we close out here, there should be a survey that will pop up on your screen. Feel free to give us any feedback there. Let us know what you liked about today's program or what you'd like to see on future programs. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program. Have a great rest of your day. And Jason, Scott, Mike, thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Have a good day.